Today, I'm joined by Emma Offord, a neurodivergent therapist and coach who supports families navigating life with ADHD, autism, sensory differences, and everything in between.
It's a heavy weight for a lot of people to go through that process. And what I think some people don't realise is the vulnerability that when you put your child forward or you are going for an assessment, you feel very vulnerable.
Yeah.
Because you're not in charge of the outcome. You're not in charge of the process. So I think it's really important to be looking for the right person to do the assessment for your child or for yourself. You're exploring identity. You're not looking to identify a problem necessarily. And you're not looking at that person through the lens of disorder and dysfunction. You're really looking at that person's identity, their different neurobiological traits. You're using affirming language. You're helping a person feel seen, not othered. And I think that brings a lot of safety to the process.
I've been diagnosed with dyslexia when I was 7, and my son, anyone who's listened to the podcast will know that my son has been diagnosed with dyslexia and dyspraxia. And I found the process was quite long for my son. It's obviously when you're being sort of assessed on things that you find quite challenging. He didn't really enjoy the process, but I personally found it beneficial to have the diagnosis because it helped us to understand his kind of strengths and his weaknesses and where we could help, and then get that support from the school as well.
There has been an idea that you can see autism, you can see ADHD. It's a very behavioural, observational way of assessing or judging someone's neurodivergence. So definitely there are some not obvious signs. They struggle with separation from their parents. So this is very often at night we see this. And I think I see this in almost all the children that I've ever assessed. I had somebody they eventually moved to having a string around the mum's finger and a string around the child.
Oh,
so
wow.
they were still linked by this string.
Yeah.
But in separate bedrooms, children start to separate from their parent, go into these environments that are perhaps not as predictable. They might be more demanding. On a sensory level, they've got completely different sensory stimuli than a child might be used to. They're being described as easygoing, like the perfect child, or, there's no problems, we don't see anything. Then they come home and they completely melt down. So what that child then is doing is often holding in or suppressing quite a lot of sensory discomfort. They're really trying to mask and fit into that environment and fit into the demands of that environment. But that really works against their neurobiology. So when they get home and then it's a safe environment, that's the recovery time.
Yeah. The school would sometimes suggest that if these things weren't happening in school as well as at home, almost more that it was behavioural rather than it actually being a problem, which as a parent I found quite frustrating.
When we really look deeper, we can see that there's a child who is suppressing so much, and then all that dysregulation happens at home where they feel safe. And they don't feel necessarily that safe from a physical or psychological perspective in the school. We tend to use some technology that actually uses a camera and a computer to track children's movement and eye movement, even when they're asked to sit still in a task. So we can track body movements and stims that can be sort of micro movements that to a trained eye you might notice, but it's not a child doing cartwheels in the classroom. A child eventually might end up in burnout or in a sort of freeze response, a kind of trauma response. I'd call it a neurodivergent trauma response because it's not how a lot of people understand trauma to present, or what might be considered even traumatic. Like school isn't considered traumatic, but it is for some neurodivergent people. It's argued that neurodivergent people might have variations in their sensory experience that can be maybe more intense, maybe harder to process, maybe more sensitive. It can be a variety of different things. So people can be sensory sensitive, which means their nervous system is being triggered into probably an uncomfortable, overwhelmed state. Think of a multisensory environment like school. It's like a sensory assault. For so many kids. They're taking all that in while trying to manage relationships and trying to learn. So if you have a spiky profile or a highly sensitive profile or a need for movement, it's going to be a really difficult environment to navigate. If they try to speak about it, it's dismissed, invalidated, don't be ridiculous, everyone else is coping, what's the problem, you're being too sensitive. And so that's a relational trauma that starts to build up for many children, that they silence themselves, that they're not being validated or accepted. They doubt themselves. They become very disembodied, many children as well. So they can't listen to their body because it can't be trusted because no one else is agreeing.
How 25% of children have a neurodivergence and they're just not being catered for in the schooling system. And it's just an absolute sin that they're being missed.
It's really sad.
My son, I have a sort of similar example. Obviously, being dyslexic, French is not something that he particularly enjoys or finds very easy. He's struggling enough with learning the English language.
Yeah.
So I sort of addressed it with the school that I didn't want him to continue French or Spanish because that time could be much better spent learning on some skills that he needs, you know, to get him through his day-to-day life rather than learning two languages that just aren't going to serve him given his dyslexia and where he's at. And when I asked my son about it, I said, you know, do you enjoy French? How do you feel about it? And he said, Mummy, I just put it in my head bin.
I feel like the world waking up.
Yeah.
To me, it's an awakening and a movement, not like who would do that for a trend?
Is neurodivergence, is it more common nowadays or is it the fact that we're just recognising it and understanding it so much more?
Yeah.
And I think if I take myself and my family, I think personally we do just recognise and understand it a lot more.
One of the main comments people say to me is that whether it's an assessment or some kind of neurodivergent coaching or learning about their neurodivergent traits in whichever way, they bring a lot of compassion to themselves, whereas before they were pushing through, they were trying to change, adapt, camouflage. You know, I always call it the me I should be, carrying this heavy weight of the me I should be that I'm not. Everybody masks, everybody. So you are looking at different degrees. You're thinking about a child who's high masking, which means they are really suppressing their needs and they are doing things that are really outside of their comfort zone. We see many children who the school are describing as picky eaters, too sensitive, difficult, you know, defiant. They're not kind of doing what we ask them to do. And that misunderstanding is born out of not understanding their sensory profile and that they are acting out of a survival response. They're anxious. Their nervous system is overwhelmed by that environment. And then the more that they're pressured to be in that environment and to conform under those conditions, the more the nervous system is getting dysregulated.
Yeah.
So that dysregulation might show up in the classroom. So it has this knock-on effect where they might be kind of squirming in their chair, they might be doodling, they might be overwhelmed with emotion, they might hit. You know, they might go into a fight response.
Yeah.
Because any trigger then is going to be hard for them to manage because they're so full up with stress. So you can see that there's this trail of like behaviour that's observed and criticised and judged and corrected. Your child is going to be having a very dysregulated day. So you want to build in recovery when they come home. And that can be things like a sensory corner. It can be no talking. Just don't even speak to your child. It can be anything that you know they need to help them regulate. Don't put demand on them to do anything else. An environment that is generally low demand. If they want to stim, let them stim. If they want to stand on their head while they're having dinner, let them do that safely. There's a lot of shame and meltdowns and burnout. All those exhausted, overwhelmed nervous system responses hold a lot of shame because it organises us outside of ourselves, how we might normally present. And so that's, again, very shaming, very confusing. Don't wait for a diagnosis. I think the whole world could benefit from learning about different traits.